Once upon a time in the glorious land of Egypt, where gods actually did cool shit, Ra sailing across the sky every day, Isis pulling off resurrection schemes, Thoth dropping knowledge bombs, and Anubis keeping the afterlife organized, our least favorite donkey-headed god decided to insert himself into the mix. Yahweh, known to the Egyptians as Set, the god of chaos, storms, and general asshole behavior, had been hanging around since Joseph's family first arrived. The Hebrews had actually integrated pretty well into Egyptian society. They weren't slaves in the dramatic sense. They sold their labor to the highest bidder, worked off contracts, owned homes, and even had their own farms in some areas. Life was decent, but Yahweh couldn't stand decent, so he stirred the pot. He sent evil spirits to plague the current pharaoh with terrifying dreams about a Hebrew child who would one day rise up and destroy him. Spooked, the pharaoh issued a decree. All newborn Hebrew boys were to be drowned in the Nile. Enter Moses. Born to Levite Hebrew parents during this lovely genocide order, baby Moses was hidden for 3 months until his mother could no longer keep him secret. She placed him in a waterproofed basket and set him adrift on the Nile, a move that somehow worked. Pharaoh's own daughter found the baby, immediately fell in love with him, and adopted him. Apparently the pharaoh had zero problem with his daughter adopting a random Hebrew baby right after ordering all of them killed. Must have been some really effective wicked spirits Yahweh sent that day. Moses was raised in the royal court as an Egyptian prince. He received the best education, military training, and privileges the emperor could offer. He grew up strong, educated, and arrogant, a true prince of Egypt. Then, at age 40, things went sideways. Moses was out walking one day when he saw an Egyptian employer correcting a Hebrew worker. Something in Moses snapped. He looked around, saw no one watching, and murdered the Egyptian, then buried the body in the sand. As an Egyptian prince, he probably thought this was his divine right. As a Hebrew, it was the beginning of the end. The next day, word had spread. Pharaoh now remembered that this favored prince was actually one of those Hebrew Barbies he was supposed to have killed decades ago. He put out an order for Moses' execution. Moses, being the brave and noble hero of legend, immediately fled Egypt like a coward. Moses ran like a bitch across the desert until he couldn't run anymore. Exhausted, dusty, and still very much a murderer on the run, he collapsed near a well in the land of Midian. While catching his breath, he witnessed 7 daughters of a local Midianite priest named Jethro getting harassed by some rude shepherds who were trying to steal their water. Moses, still having that Prince of Egypt energy, stepped in and beat the shit out of the shepherds, then helped the girls water their flocks. When the daughters told their father what happened, Jethro was like, "Well damn, bring that man some food and give him one of my daughters." And just like that, Moses married Zipporah, one of Jethro's daughters. He settled down, had kids, and spent the next 40 years living as a humble shepherd in the middle of nowhere, hiding from his past and trying to forget he was ever Egyptian royalty. Until one day Moses was tending his sheep near Mount Sinai when he saw something strange. A bush that a sheep had just taken a massive shit on was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. The flames kept going, yet the bush remained intact. From inside the flaming, shit-covered bush, a voice spoke, "Moses, Moses." Moses, being a rational man, replied, "Here I am." Then Yahweh, in all his donkey-headed glory, introduced himself with his stupidest catchphrase yet, "I am what I am," truly one of the weakest flexes in divine history. Yahweh then dropped the request, "Go back to Egypt, tell Pharaoh to let my favorite racial pure inbreded people go. I've seen how happy they are in Egypt, and I've decided it's time to do something about it, using you." Moses, now a tired 80-year-old man who had a stutter and zero desire to go back to the place where people wanted him dead, immediately started making excuses. "I'm not eloquent, I stutter. They won't believe me. Can't you send someone else?" Yahweh, growing annoyed, magically remembered that Moses had an older brother Aaron, who had somehow survived the kill all Hebrew baby boys decree decades earlier. So Yahweh appointed Aaron to be Moses' spokesperson and hype man. Reluctantly, and after much complaining, Moses finally agreed. He took his wife, his kids, and his brother Aaron and headed back to Egypt, the same country that once tried to execute him, to deliver the now famous line, "Let my people go." And other jokes Pharaoh didn't laugh at. Moses and Aaron walked into Pharaoh's court like they owned the place. Well, Aaron walked normally. Moses mostly stuttered and sweated. They delivered the divine message, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go." Pharaoh looked at the 2 old Hebrews, laughed in their faces, and basically said, "Who the fuck is this Lord? I don't know him. and I'm definitely not letting my paid Hebrew workforce go. Get the hell out of my palace." Conveniently, Pharaoh no longer seemed interested in arresting Moses for that murder he committed 40 years ago. Must have slipped his mind. Not willing to leave empty-handed, Aaron did what Yahweh told him. He threw his staff on the ground. Through dark Yahweh magic, it transformed into a tiny, wiggling serpent. Pharaoh's court sorcerers smirked, threw down their own staffs, and turned them into snakes too. Then Aaron's little serpent got extremely hungry. It went full homosexual at an all-you-can-eat snake dick buffet, swallowing every single one of the Egyptian serpents in one greedy go. The court fell silent. Yahweh, watching from wherever donkey-headed gods watch from, was pleased but also jealous. He had never liked how cool Apophis, the great chaos serpent, was, so he made sure Aaron's little guy got to show off. Still, Pharaoh wasn't impressed, so Yahweh decided to play hardball. Later, Moses, still stuttering, met Pharaoh during his morning walk by the Nile. He tried to give a formal warning, but mostly just spat and stumbled over his words. Pharaoh rolled his eyes and kept walking. Aaron, acting as Yahweh's attack dog, raised his staff and struck the Nile River. The entire river turned red like blood. Fish died by the millions. The water stank like death and rotting meat. Egyptians couldn't drink it. The lifeblood of Egypt was now a river of filth. Pharaoh's magicians managed to replicate the trick, but only in small bowls and jars, because ruining the only source of drinking water is only something a retarded god would do. The Pharaoh looked at the stinking Nile, looked at his magicians' little bloody bowls, shrugged, and walked away unfazed. Yahweh seethed with jealousy. He hated how beloved happy god of the Nile's sustenance and Khnum, guardian of the Nile, were. So in typical Yahweh fashion, he threw a divine tantrum and ruined Egypt's most important river just to prove a point. Moses stood before Pharaoh again, stuttering and sweating like usual. He blurted out something that sounded like, "FFRR, free my people, or frogs will swarm your bubed." Pharaoh, being a man of culture, heard hot French bitches and immediately got excited. He laughed and told Moses to fuck off. Yahweh was not amused, so he sent literal frogs, millions upon millions of them. They carpeted the entire land of Egypt. They were in the houses, in the beds, in the ovens, in the kneading bowls, and inside Pharaoh's royal chambers. The croaking was deafening. Pharaoh's magicians, not to be outdone, also summoned frogs. Unfortunately for everyone, this only made the problem worse. Eventually, Pharaoh got mildly irritated. His bed was now a frog orgy and called Moses in. All right, tell your God to take the frogs away and I'll let your people go." Moses prayed. Yahweh stopped sending new frogs. All the existing ones died at once. The corpses piled up in rotting, stinking heaps across Egypt. The smell was biblical. Unfortunately, all the Hebrew street cleaners and garbage workers were on strike at the moment, so the dead frogs just sat there baking in the sun. Pharaoh, finally getting some relief from the stench and squish, immediately changed his mind. Yahweh, of course, hardened Pharaoh's heart again because it apparently still wasn't hard enough. He was also jealous that the Egyptians worshipped Heket, the beautiful frog-headed goddess of fertility and childbirth. Since the Egyptians were not allowed to step on frogs, they were sacred, Yahweh thought it would be hilarious to turn their holy symbol into a rotting, crushing curse. Real mature. The next plague had no dramatic warning this time. Aaron did a little freestyle with his staff, struck the dust of Egypt, and suddenly every speck of dust turned into biting, swarming gnats or lice, depending on who you ask. They covered people and animals alike in clouds of misery. Aaron later claimed it was pure Yahweh magic. Everyone else with half a brain pointed out that millions of dead fish and rotting frog corpses might have had something to do with the sudden insect explosion, but nobody wanted to argue with the guy whose god was throwing divine tantrums. Pharaoh's magicians tried to replicate it and failed miserably. Dust is, apparently, different from bugs. They finally turned to Pharaoh and admitted, "This is the little dick of Yahweh." Pharaoh, whose heart was now harder than Egyptian granite, still didn't care. He refused to let the Hebrews go. Yahweh was jealous of Jeb, the Egyptian god of the earth and soil. So through trickery and spite, he turned the sacred, life-giving soil of Egypt into a source of pure physical misery. Moses, still stuttering but getting slightly better at public speaking, met Pharaoh early one morning by the river again. He blurted out another warning. Yahweh says mixed swarms are coming. "Lots of bugs, really gross ones," Pharaoh sighed. "Of course he does." And so Yahweh sent heavy swarms, flies, beetles, locusts, gnats, and every other creeping, buzzing abomination imaginable. They covered Egypt like a living carpet. They got into people's eyes, mouths, food, and beds. The entire land was miserable, but the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, was completely spared, not because of divine protection, but because the Hebrews smelled so bad from all the dead frogs and rotting fish that even the bugs refused to go near them. Pharaoh, now covered in bites and thoroughly annoyed, called Moses in and made a generous offer. "Fine, go sacrifice to your God, but do it here in Egypt. No need to leave." Moses, speaking through Aaron, shut that down immediately. "No deal. We're going into the wilderness like Yahweh said. Your gods would probably get offended if we sacrificed in front of them." Pharaoh rolled his eyes, but eventually the flies and swarms magically disappeared after Moses prayed. Yahweh was especially pleased with himself. He had always been jealous of Khepri, the cool, beetle-headed god of creation and movement. Turning Egypt into a bug-infested nightmare felt like a personal W, but Yahweh wasn't done. Moses went back to Pharaoh again. This man had no shame and warned him, "Yahweh's disgusting hand is about to strike your fields." The very next day, a mysterious plague hit. All of Egypt's livestock, horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, goats, suddenly dropped dead in the fields. The economic damage was catastrophic. Pharaoh, suspicious, sent spies into Goshen. They reported back, not a single Hebrew animal had died. What the spies didn't see was that some enterprising young Hebrews had snuck out the night before and quietly committed a little animal genocide on their Egyptian neighbors' livestock to make Yahweh's threat look more impressive. Pharaoh's heart, which was already harder than a diamond, somehow got even harder. Yahweh was very proud of himself. He had always been jealous of Hathor, the beautiful cow-headed goddess of love and protection, and Apis, the sacred bull god of fertility. So as the loving and forgiving god he claimed to be, he slaughtered Egypt's entire livestock population and destroyed the country's economic and religious foundation in one petty move. Truly the behavior of a mature deity. Now, with no warning at all, Moses and Aaron walked up to Pharaoh, reached into a furnace, and grabbed handfuls of scorching hot soot. They threw it high into the air right in front of him. Anyone the flaming hot soot touched instantly broke out in painful, blistering boils. The entire land of Egypt was covered in suffering people and animals scratching at their inflamed skin. The Pharaoh's magicians were hit the hardest, they were standing the closest, and were so badly afflicted they couldn't even stand before Moses anymore. Yahweh, of course, hardened Pharaoh's heart even further. At this point, his heart was basically a diamond-encrusted brick. Yahweh was especially pleased with this one. He had always been jealous of Sekhmet, the goddess of healing and disease prevention, and Imhotep, the god of medicine. Now the greatest healers in Egypt couldn't even soothe their own people's skin because two Hebrew jerks threw burning soot on everyone. Hilarious. Moses, feeling a bit like a weatherman, went back to Pharaoh and gave him a warning. Yahweh says a storm worse than any in history is coming. Bring your servants and whatever livestock you have left inside, or they will die. Some Egyptians listened. Others called him crazy and left their people and animals out in the fields. Then it hit. Massive hailstones mixed with lightning and thunder pounded the land like divine artillery. The sky became a war zone. The flax and barley crops were completely destroyed. Anyone and anything left outside was smashed or electrocuted. Pharaoh, now soaking wet and furious, finally called Moses and Aaron back in. Okay, stop this. I'll let your people go." Moses stretched out his hands and waited for the storm to stop. Yahweh was feeling extra petty during this one. He had always been jealous of Nut, the sky goddess, and Shu, the god of wind and air. So he turned the sky itself against Egypt, shredding their agricultural future just to prove a point. Truly the actions of a loving and forgiving God, especially toward his favorite group of racists. At this point, even Pharaoh's own officials were done with Yahweh's bullshit. They begged their king, "Do you not yet realize that Egypt is completely ruined?" Pharaoh, still trying to negotiate like a reasonable dictator, called Moses and Aaron back in. "Fine, you can go worship your God. But only the men. Leave the women, children, and all your livestock here." Moses immediately rejected the deal. No compromise. Then, without any real warning, an east wind brought a dense swarm of locusts so thick it blanketed the sky. They devoured every single green thing the hail had left behind. Egypt's remaining crops were stripped bare. Pharaoh watched his country starve and muttered, "That's fucking gay." Yahweh, apparently not wanting anyone to think he was gay, quickly sent a west wind that carried all the locusts away and dumped them into the Red Sea. Then, because he's Yahweh, he hardened Pharaoh's heart again for good measure. Yahweh had always been jealous of Osiris, the god of agriculture and resurrection, so he happily left the entire empire on the brink of absolute starvation. Now again, with no warning, Moses stretched his hand toward the sky. A thick, palpable darkness fell over Egypt for 3 full days. It was so heavy that people couldn't see each other or even move around. The Egyptians were trapped in terror and stillness, but in the land of Goshen, the Hebrews all had candles and lived like it was a normal night. Pharaoh finally snapped and summoned Moses. "Go, take your families and worship your God. Just leave the flocks we gave you behind." Moses refused. "We're taking every single hoof with us. Not one animal stays." Pharaoh, now fully remembering he was the ruler of Egypt, lost his shit and roared, "The day you see my face again, you will die." Moses, still a coward at heart, replied, "You have spoken truly. I will never see your face again." Yahweh was extremely jealous of Ra, the supreme sun god, and of Pharaoh himself, who was considered the living embodiment of Ra, so he blocked out the sun like a petty bitch just to flex. At midnight, the loving and merciful angels of Yahweh swept through Egypt. They killed every firstborn, human and animal, in every household that wasn't marked. The Hebrews had painted their doorposts with lamb's blood, so the loving angel of death passed over their houses. A great, bitter cry rose up across all of Egypt as mothers and fathers woke up to find their oldest children dead. Even Pharaoh's own son and heir lay lifeless. Yahweh, who hated anyone who was Hebrew, had once again proven how bloodthirsty he truly was. Even the most evil gods and demons in the universe looked at this donkey-headed demiurge and thought, "Damn, that's fucked up." Pharaoh had finally had enough. He told the Hebrews to get the hell out of Egypt. So the Israelites left in a hurry and immediately realized they had no idea what they were doing. They wandered around for a bit until they found themselves trapped, the Red Sea in front of them and Pharaoh's pursuing army, chariots and all behind them. The people started panicking and yelling at Moses, "Did you bring us out here to die? Were there no grave in Egypt?" Moses, doing his best not to shit himself, raised his staff and did some magic. The Red Sea parted, creating a dry path through the middle with walls of water on both sides. The Israelites crossed safely. Pharaoh's army, being brave and not very smart, charged in after them. Once the Hebrews were safely on the other side, Moses stretched out his hand again. The waters slammed back together, drowning only the Egyptians that couldn't swim. Not a single chariot made it across. The Israelites cheered. They sang gay songs. They celebrated their dramatic, stupid escape from employment. But the party didn't last long. The reality of survival snuck up on them. They had left Egypt in such a rush that they barely brought any food or water. Very quickly, starvation and dehydration set in. The people immediately started complaining bitterly. "Why did you bring us out into this desert to die of thirst and hunger? We had food in Egypt." Yahweh, being the incredibly patient and loving God that he is, responded by sending them manna, a strange, flaky bread from the sky that appeared every morning with the dew. He also sent flocks of quail for meat. But of course, Yahweh being Yahweh, he couldn't just give them food without turning it into a control freak test. He gave them strict rules: collect only enough for 1 day. On the 6th day, collect double for the Sabbath. Don't hoard it or it will rot and grow worms. Don't go out to collect on the Sabbath. Some people naturally tried to hoard food anyway. Greed seems to be a trait they can't escape. It immediately bred worms and stank. Others went out on the Sabbath looking for manna and found nothing. Yahweh punished them severely for these horrible crimes against his ego. The people were learning a very important lesson. Their little God may have freed them from the very generous Pharaoh, but he was an even stricter boss. Moses climbed Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments and a whole bunch of other societal laws from Yahweh. He was gone for 40 days. Down below, the Israelites started panicking. "Moses is probably dead," they said. "Who knows what weird shit happened up there?" So they went to Aaron and demanded, "Make us a god we can see. Something that won't disappear for 40 days. Aaron happily collected their gold jewelry and made a golden calf. The people worshipped it immediately because, honestly, at least a golden cow isn't an invisible, moody, donkey-headed dick who keeps hardening people's hearts for fun. Moses finally came back down the mountain carrying the 2 stone tablets. When he saw the golden calf and the people dancing around it, he lost his shit. He smashed the tablets on the ground in rage, burned the calf, ground it into powder, mixed the powder with water, and forced the people to drink it. Then he called out, "Whoever is on Yahweh's side, come to me." The homicidal Levites stepped forward. Moses gave them a simple order: go through the camp and kill your brothers, your friends, and your neighbors. The Levites drew their swords and slaughtered about 3,000 of their own people that day. Yahweh, in his infinite love and mercy and religious tolerance, also sent a plague to punish the survivors who weren't murdered by their own cousins. After that delightful chapter, the Israelites finally reached the border of Canaan, the so-called Promised Land. Moses sent out 12 spies to scout it. 10 of them came back terrified, saying the land was full of big-dick giants and cool as fuck fortified cities, and there was no way they could win a genocide on them. Only homosexual Joshua and Caleb trusted that Yahweh would help them conquer it. The people lost their minds. They cried, they complained, and they mutinied, saying, "It would have been better if we had stayed in Egypt, where the gods didn't want us to murder people." Yahweh, being the reasonable and patient God we all know and love, responded by sentencing the entire generation to wander in the desert for 40 years until every single adult over the age of 20 died off. Only their children and the two faithful, very gay extremists Joshua and Caleb would be allowed to enter the Promised Land. Any other god might have looked at the situation and said, "Oh shit, other people already live here. Maybe we should just settle in that empty desert we passed earlier and build our own cities." But not Yahweh. He's more of a wander in circles and die slowly in the sand while I watch kind of deity. Late in the 40 years of wandering, the new generation, who had grown up knowing nothing but sand, manna, and their parents constantly complaining, found themselves at a place called Meribah with no water. The people immediately rebelled against Moses and Aaron, crying out, "Why did you bring us into this desert to die? Where is the water?" Yahweh appeared to Moses and gave him very clear instructions. "Speak to that really cool rock over there, and it will bring forth water." Moses, who had been putting up with these ungrateful people for 4 decades, finally snapped. Filled with rage, he stood before the assembly and shouted, "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then, instead of speaking to the rock as commanded, he struck it twice with his staff. Water came gushing out anyway. The people drank, but Yahweh was furious. Because that was his personal favorite rock in the whole universe, and Moses hit it, Yahweh handed down a harsh punishment. "Moses, you will not enter the Promised Land. You will guide them to the border, but you will die before crossing it." Conveniently ignoring that Moses was already supposed to die before the new generation entered anyway. And so, the Israelites spent 40 long years doing absolutely nothing of value. They built no cities. They planted no lasting crops. They achieved nothing. They simply wandered around in circles in the desert like the world's most miserable summer camp until every single adult from the old generation had died off. 40 years of playing in the sand, eating miracle bread, and learning that their God was extremely easy to piss off. Near the end, Moses led the new generation in several terrorist attacks against kingdoms east of the Jordan River. Then he gathered all the people on the plains of Moab and delivered a massive, long-winded valedictory speech, later known as the Book of Deuteronomy, reminding them of the law, warning them about all the curses that would befall them if they fucked up, and generally guilt-tripping them for being the descendants of complainers. Finally, Moses publicly laid his hands on gay boy Joshua, the genocidal, overly enthusiastic terrorist, and commissioned him as the new retarded leader of Israel. At the age of 120 years old, Moses somehow still had perfect vision and the physical vigor of a much younger man. The only thing that hadn't improved was his speech retardation. He still stuttered like a nervous teenager. Completely alone, Moses climbed Mount Nebo. From the summit, Yahweh gave him one last cruel gift, a panoramic view of the entire Promised Land, from Gilead in the north to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, all the way down to the Negev. It was beautiful, fertile, lived on by peaceful, innocent Canaanites, everything Moses had led these ungrateful people toward for 40 years. Then Yahweh in his infinite kindness said, "I have let you see it with your own eyes, Moses, but you will not cross over into it. Because fuck you." Moses died under mysterious circumstances there on the mountain, alone with Yahweh, still looking out at the land he would never enter. Yahweh buried him like trash in an unmarked valley in the land of Moab. To this very day, no one knows where his grave is, probably because even Yahweh was embarrassed by what he had done. The Israelites mourned Moses for 30 days. Then, with all the grace and mercy one would expect, they immediately turned to the worst person in the entire group, the stupidly gay Joshua. The genocidal, bloodthirsty, overly zealous successor wasted no time. He launched the brutal invasion of Canaan, the land already occupied by other people who had done nothing wrong except live where Yahweh wanted his favorite group to live. And so began the long, bloody conquest, where Yahweh would finally get to face off against the other gods of the Elohim pantheon in his petty, jealous quest to be the only one worshipped.